The total flashed on the screen, $684, and Naomi Carter felt the world tilt under her. She stood at the pharmacy counter in Dayton, Ohio, gripping the strap of her worn purse as if it could hold her steady. The pharmacist's voice was calm, almost too calm, as he explained that her insurance had lapsed after the diner reduced her hours last month. Without active coverage, her 9-year-old son's insulin would cost the full price. There were no discounts left to apply, no emergency override. Beside her stood Milo Carter, thin shoulders tucked into a faded hoodie, watching the floor instead of the adults. He had learned early how to read silence. He knew when money was being discussed. He knew when his name was the reason. Naomi pulled out her phone and opened her bank app. The screen loaded slowly, like it was giving her one last second of hope. The balance showed $52.08. Rent was due in 4 days. The electricity bill was already late. She felt heat rise in her face, but she forced her voice to stay steady. She asked if the pharmacy could hold the prescription until Friday. The pharmacist hesitated before explaining they could only hold it for 24 hours before returning it to 24 hours felt like nothing. Naomi nodded as if that answer was. She thanked him, even though her chest felt tight, and turned toward the exit. Milo followed quietly. The automatic doors opened with a soft hiss, and the cold Ohio air hit her face. She blinked fast, refusing to cry where her son could see. Across the aisle, 3 10-year-olds had stopped arguing about cereal brands. Harper Caldwell stood frozen, her eyes wide. Nolan leaned slightly forward. Beckett tilted his head. They had heard the number. They had heard the strain in Naomi's voice. Children notice things adults overlook, and these 3 noticed everything. A few steps behind them stood their father, Ethan Caldwell. He was a widower, raising triplets alone since losing his wife 3 years ago. He was checking items off a grocery list on his phone, unaware that his children were witnessing something that would not leave them. Ethan believed in handling his own problems quietly. He did not yet realize his children were learning to care about other people's problems too. Inside the car, Naomi buckled Milo into the passenger seat. She forced a small smile and told him she would. She always did. That was what single parents did. They stretched, they borrowed time, they carried fear in silence. Milo nodded and told her he felt okay. He even said he could use a little less insulin to make it last longer. His voice was light, but his skin looked pale against the gray afternoon sky. Naomi's heart cracked at that. A 9-year-old should not be calculating survival. Back in the store parking lot, Ethan loaded groceries into the trunk while his children were usually quiet beside him. Harper kept glancing toward the road where Naomi's car had disappeared. Nolan's brows were pulled together in thought. Beckett kicked lightly at the pavement, distracted. Ethan finally noticed the silence. Normally, his triplets filled every space with noise and questions. Today, they moved as one quiet unit. He asked if something had happened. Harper answered carefully, saying the boy inside needed medicine and his mom could not buy it. Nolan added that it sounded important. Beckett said. The woman looked scared but was pretending not to be. Ethan felt something shift inside. He had seen that look before. He had worn it himself after his wife died, when bills came in and he did not know how he would manage 3. The community had helped him then. Neighbors had dropped off meals. His co-workers had vacation hours. He remembered the relief of not carrying everything by himself. Noimo drove home in silence, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She mentally rearranged numbers again, searching for a way to make $52 stretch into $684. She thought about selling her old laptop. She thought about skipping groceries. She thought about calling her ex-husband, but pride stopped her. He had left when Milo was diagnosed, saying it was too much pressure. She would not beg him now. Milo leaned his head against the window, trying to stay cheerful. He told his mom he was not that hungry. He told her he felt strong. Naomi nodded, but she noticed the way he blinked slowly, the way his energy dipped just slightly. Fear pressed against her rib, but she kept driving. At home, Ethan's triplets gathered in their shared bedroom after dinner. They did not turn on the TV. They did not argue about homework. Instead, they whispered. Harper said insulin keeps people alive. Nolan said adults should not have to choose between money and medicine. Beckett said. It felt wrong to walk away. Ethan, downstairs, sensed the quiet above him. He did not know what decision was forming, but he felt the weight of it. He had always taught his children to be kind. He just had not expected kindness to call them into someone else's story. Upstairs, Harper looked at her brothers with firm eyes. Nolan nodded slowly. Beckett agreed without hesitation. In that small bedroom, the triplets made a quiet promise to each other. They would not ignore what they heard at this pharmacy, and that choice was about to change 5 lives forever. 3 years ago, Ethan Caldwell made a promise in a hospital hallway that he would never walk away. The night his wife, Marissa, died in a sudden car accident, Ethan stood between three small hospital chairs where Harper, Nolan, and Beckett sat with red eyes and trembling hands. He did not fully understand how he was still breathing, but he knew one thing with sharp clarity. His children had just lost one parent. They would not lose another, not emotionally, not physically, not in any way that mattered. From that day on, Ethan chose staying over everything else. He shifted his entire life to keep that promise. He asked his company for a remote logistician so he could work from home. The pay was steady, but the job required focus and long hours in front of a screen. Still, it allowed him to be there when the school bus dropped the kids off each afternoon. It allowed him to cook dinner instead of ordering takeout. It allowed him to show up. That mattered more than promotions or office titles. The community often called him strong. Neighbors admired how he handled 3 kids alone. Teachers told him they respected his dedication. Ethan always gave a small nod and changed the subject. Strength, to him, did not feel heroic. It felt like being tired every day and still choosing to move forward. It felt like answering work emails at midnight, finishing laundry and packing lunches. It felt like swallowing his own grief because 3 other hearts depended on him. Mornings in the Caldwell house were loud and rushed. Harper needed help with her hair, and Ethan tried his best, even though his braids leaned sideways and never looked quite right. Nolan often misplaced one shoe, and Beckett liked to ask Dada questions about life before 7 in the morning. Ethan cooked scrambled eggs while checking his laptop. Sometimes he forgot to eat his own breakfast. Sometimes he realized at noon that he had skipped lunch too. His needs always came last, but he rarely noticed. Evenings were calmer but heavier. After homework and dishes, when the kids were finally asleep, the house became too quiet. The silence pressed against. Marissa's laughter used to fill those spaces. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of Ethan. Loneliness sat beside him most nights, quiet but constant. Friends had tried to encourage him to start dating again. They said he deserved happiness. They said the kids would adjust. Ethan listened politely but never followed through. It was not that he did not believe in love anymore. It was that he feared bringing someone into their world only another loss. He chose stability over possibility. He chose his children every time. The triplets had changed too. Grief had not hardened them. Instead, it made their. Harper noticed when someone forced a smile. Nolan paid attention in silence. Beckett asked questions that reached deeper than adults expected. They understood pain in a way most 10-year-olds did not. That was why the pharmacy moment stayed with them. Ethan did not know how deeply it had affected them. After dinner that night, the children were quieter than usual. Harper kept glancing at her tablet. Nolan asked thoughtful questions about how insulin worked. Beckett wondered aloud why medicine cost so much. Ethan answered carefully, explaining that some families struggled with medical bills. He kept his tone calm, but inside, something tugged at him. The image of Naomi standing at the counter replayed in his mind. He remembered her steady voice that did not match her worried eyes. He remembered the boy trying to look strong. Ethan recognized that kind of strength. It was the kind built from being alone too long. Upstairs, the triplets gathered in Harper's room. They spoke in low voices about the incident. They wondered what would happen if he did not get his medicine. Harper said it felt like when their mom was sick, people pretended everything was fine. Nolan said adults sometimes hid. Beckett said maybe that lady did not have anyone helping her. Downstairs, Ethan leaned back in his chair after finishing work email. He stared at the dark screen and thought about how children often see what adults ignore. Adults get distracted by schedules and pride. Children respond to feelings. His kids had felt something at that pharmacy, and now so had he. Looked. He told himself it was not his responsibility. He had 3 children of his own. His energy was limited. But the thought of doing nothing felt heavier than the thought of stepping in. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a pull beyond the walls of his own. It was not about being a hero. It was about remembering how it felt when others had stepped in for him. Upstairs, Harper opened her tablet and began searching quietly. She typed in simple words about insulin costs and what happens when kids miss. The results appeared quickly. Her eyes moved faster as she read. Nolan and Beckett leaned. The more they learned, the more serious their faces became. Ethan walked past her room to turn off the hallway light and noticed the glow from under her door. He gently pushed it open and looked toward the screen. On Harper's tablet were stories about children rushed to hospitals because they could not afford insulin. And as Ethan read the headline shining in the dark, his chest tightened, because now doing nothing no longer felt like an option. By morning, the pharmacy moment was no longer just a memory. It had become a mission. Harper woke up earlier than her mind still full of what she had read the night before. She had spent hours researching type 1 diabetes. In simple terms, she learned that insulin was not optional. It was not something you could delay for long. It was life-saving medicine that the body could not make on its own. Without it, a child's blood sugar could rise to dangerous levels. The words on the screen had been clear and direct, and they scared her. At breakfast, the triplets did not argue about cereal or toast. Nolan brought a notebook to the table and began writing numbers. He calculated how many lawns they would need to mow in their neighborhood to earn $684. He estimated 10 lawns a week at $20 each. It would take weeks. Beckett suggested selling their old gaming console that they barely used anymore. Harper said she would give up her birthday money. Their voices were serious, not dramatic, just steady and focused. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when he overheard the entire plan. He stayed quiet, listening as his children calmly discussed giving up their own things to help a boy they had never met. He felt both proud and stunned. They were 10 years old. They should have been planning sleepovers and soccer games, not financial rescue missions. When Harper said the boy might not have weeks to wait, Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped into the conversation and asked, gentle, what they were planning. Nolan explained that people alive every day. Beckett added that the lady at the pharmacy did not look like someone who had backup. Harper said, sometimes grown-ups act strong because they do not want their kids scared. Ethan sat down slowly. His children were not asking for permission to care. They were simply trying to figure out how. He felt an internal pull that he had not expected. Part of him wanted to protect his family's limited energy. Life was already full, but another part of him remembered what it felt like to stand in a hospital hallway 3 years ago, with bills stacking up and no idea how he would feed three. He remembered neighbors showing up with food. He remembered coworkers donating money quietly without making him feel small. He remembered how unexpected kindness had carried him through the darkest months of his life. Back then, he had promised himself that if he ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, he would not look away. Maybe this was that chance. After dropping the kids at school, Ethan drove back to the pharmacy. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. He told himself he would not invade anyone's privacy. He only wanted to know if the prescription had been picked up. Inside, the pharmacist recognized the day before. Ethan asked carefully about the insulin prescription for the woman who had come in with her son. The pharmacist glanced at the computer and said the prescription was still unclaimed. It had been placed back into inventory. 24-hour hold had expired. Ethan felt a sharp wave of concern. That meant Naomi had not returned. That meant she might still be without the medicine her son needed. Without hesitating further, Ethan took out his checkbook. He wrote a check covering the full amount and placed it inside a sealed envelope. He asked the pharmacist to call the number on file and let the woman know her son's insulin had been paid for anonymously. He did not want recognition. He did not want gratitude. He only wanted the child to have what he needed. The pharmacist hesitated again before explaining something that made Ethan's stomach drop. The insulin had already been returned to the distributor that morning due to supply rotation. A new order could be placed, but it would take at least a day to arrive. A day felt long when insulin was involved. Ethan stood there processing the. He had assumed money was the only barrier. Now he realized timing was another. He asked if the pharmacy had any emergency supply programs. The pharmacist said they had limited options and that families sometimes went to the emergency room. Things became urgent. Ethan stepped outside into the parking lot, the envelope still in his hand. The sky looked heavier than the day before. He thought about Naomi's pale smile. He thought about Milo saying he felt fine. He thought about his own children waiting at school, believing they were helping. The situation no longer felt simple. Paying for the insulin was only part of the solution. If Naomi had not come back, it could mean many things. Maybe she found help elsewhere. Maybe she was still trying to figure it out. Or maybe she was stretching what little insulin Milo had left, hoping nothing would go wrong. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility. This was no longer about generosity. It was about urgency. He got back into his car and sat still for a long. He did not know Naomi's address. He did not know her story. But he knew one thing clearly. Children should not suffer because adults are afraid to ask for help. He had seen that truth too closely in his own life. As Ethan started the engine, one thought rose above all others. Paying for insulin was no longer enough. And if he did not find Naomi, it might already be too late. Naomi Carter did not become strong by choice. She became strong because no one else stayed. 4 years earlier, when Milo was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, her husband had sat in a small clinic room staring at the doctor's chart like it was written in another language. The words were clear. Daily insulin, constant monitoring, lifelong management. It was not temporary. It was not simple. 2 months later, he packed a suitcase and said the pressure was too. He promised to send money. The money stopped after 3 payments. The silence lasted longer. Naomi signed the divorce papers without drama. She did not chase him. She did not beg. She focused on learning everything about insulin, carb counts, and warning signs. Medical bills began stacking up with insurance at the time. Deductibles and co-pays drained her savings. She took extra shifts at the local diner, smiling at customers while calculating. When insurance coverage shifted and hours were cut, the math stopped working. Medical debt piled up like unopened mail. Naomi sold her wedding ring one winter to cover a 3-month insulin supply. She told Milo she had simply outgrown it. He nodded, pretending to believe. Single-parent resilience. She woke before sunrise, packed Milo's lunch with careful carb measurements, checked his blood sugar, then rushed to the diner. She worked double shift when she called, her feet aching by nightfall. She learned to stretch groceries. She learned to delay her own dentist. She learned to live without asking for help. Milo noticed more than he began apologizing for small things. He would say he was not that hungry even when he was. He once asked if insulin was very expensive. Naomi smiled and said health was more important than money. But he heard the tiredness in her. Somewhere deep inside, he began to believe he was the reason she. That belief broke her heart, but she hid it well. The night after the pharmacy, Naomi sat at the kitchen in their small apartment, staring at the nearly empty insulin. She calculated how much was left. If she adjusted the doses slightly and monitored carefully, she might stretch it another day, maybe two. She knew it was not ideal, but risk sometimes felt cheaper than $684. Milo sat on the couch doing homework, trying to act normal. Naomi checked his blood sugar before bed. It was slightly higher than she liked, but not dangerous yet. She told herself they would be fine until Friday. She had survived worse. She had handled worse fears. After Milo fell asleep, Naomi remained at the kitchen table in the dim light. Pride and fear battled quietly inside her. She could call the hospital and explain the situation, but emergency visits meant more bills, more debt, more letters in the mail that she avoided opening. She could ask a coworker for help, but the thought of admitting she could not provide for her son made her chest tighten. She had survived by relying on her son. Asking for help felt like failing. Across town, Ethan Caldwell drove slowly through neighborhoods near the pharmacy. He did not have much information on. Looked, a vague memory of Naomi's car and the direction she had turned. He felt slightly foolish, like he was chasing a shadow. But something inside him refused. He stopped by the diner near the pharmacy, stepping inside casually and ordering coffee. He scanned the room quietly. After a few minutes, he noticed a framed employee photo board near the register. Naomi's face was there, smiling in a uniform apron. He felt a small surge of relief. At least he had a starting point. He simply left his name and number with the manager, explaining that he might have important information for Naomi regarding a pharmacy matter. The manager nodded politely. Back in her apartment, Naomi heard a soft sound from Milo's bedroom. She walked in and saw him shifting under the blanket. She checked his blood sugar. The number had dropped slightly lower than expected. Not critical yet, but close enough to worry her. She gave him a small snack and told him it was fine. She would wake up again in a few hours to check. She had done this before. She could handle it. Then continued driving through nearby apartment comps, looking for the old sedan he remembered. Finally, under a dim streetlight, he spotted it parked outside a small brick building. His heart pounded. He did not know what he would. He did not even know if this was, but he felt certain enough to stop inside the apartment. Naomi sat beside Milo's bed watching him. The quiet felt heavier than ever. She realized how alone she truly was in that moment. No partner, no backup, no safety net. Just her and the weight of every decision. Then Milo's body shifted suddenly. His hands trembled slightly against the blanket. Naomi leaned forward quickly, her breath catching. As Milo began to shake harder in the dim bedroom light, Naomi felt a cold wave of fear rush through her, and she knew she had waited too long. Milo's hands would not stop shaking. Naomi felt the fear hit her all at once as she watched her son tremble under. She grabbed the glucose meters and checked his blood sugar. The number on the screen made her heart drop. It was falling too fast. The snack she had given him was not enough. The insulin she had stretched had not done its job properly. She had tried to manage it alone, but now the risk was staring back at her. She moved quick, her thoughts racing. She gave him juice, her voice calm even though her chest felt tight. Milo tried to sit up, but Naomi could no longer pretend this was something she could fix with careful planning. She picked up her phone and called 911. Her voice cracked but she forced herself. This was her child. She would not fall apart now. The ambulance lights flashed against the apartment walls minutes. Naomi rode beside Milo, and whispering that everything would. Inside, she felt guilt rising like a. She should have found a way. She should have asked someone. Pride felt small compared to fear now. Across town, Ethan Caldwell had just left the diner parking lot. He had been sitting in his car, unsure of his next step when he heard the distant sound of sirens. He looked up and saw an ambulance turn quickly into a nearby apartment complex. Something in his chest tightened. He did not know why, but he followed at a distance. When the ambulance doors opened, Ethan saw Naomi step out, her face pale, under the flashing lights. He recognized Milo immediately. The same hoodie, the same quiet expression, now replaced with weakness. Ethan's breath caught. The timeline he had feared was unfolding faster than he expected. He followed his instincts and drove toward the hospital. He parked and walked inside, unsure if he was crossing a line. In the emergency waiting room, Naomi sat alone in a plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked smaller than she had in the pharmacy, like the weight of the night had pressed her down. Ethan stood near the entrance for debating. This was private. He did not want to invade her pain. But Harper's message buzzed on his phone just then. She had texted him after noticing he was not home yet. She wrote that they cared about the insulin because no one should face scary things. The words were simple, but they landed deep. Ethan walked quietly to the row of chairs across from Naomi and sat down. He did not speak. He simply waited. The room smelled of disinfectant and worry. Time felt stretched thin. After what felt like hours, a doctor stepped out and called Naomi's name. Ethan watched her stand. The doctor explained that Milo's blood sugar had dropped dangerously, but that they had stabilized him. He would need monitoring for a few hours. He was responding well. Naomi nodded, and exhaustion mixed. Then came the quiet warning about the visit generating a medical bill. The words were not harsh, just factual. Naomi nodded again, but this time her eyes filled. She thanked the doctor and sat back down, her shoulders finally sagging. Ethan felt the moment shift. He stood and gently introduced himself, reminding her that they had been at the pharmacy the day before. Naomi's eyes widened with recognition, and embarrassment flushed her face. She apologized quickly, saying she normally handled things better. She explained that she had planned to return for the incident. Ethan shook his head gently. He told her she had nothing to apologize for. He shared briefly that he was a single parent too. He told her he understood how heavy responsibility could feel. He mentioned that his children had overheard the pharmacy conversation and had not stopped thinking about her son. His tone was calm, not dramatic, not pitiful. Naomi listened quietly. She felt exposed, but also strangely seen. She admitted she had tried to stretch the ends to make it last until she admitted she did not like asking for help. Ethan told her that accepting help was not a weakness. Sometimes it was how people survived. He explained that he had already left money at the pharmacy and that he would make sure it was reordered first thing in the morning. He made it clear he was not offering charity. He was offering support. Believed no parent should carry everything alone. His voice carried no judgment, only steady reassurance. Naomi's eyes filled, but this time ears were softer. She had spent years fighting to do this by herself. Now someone was offering to stand beside her without making her feel small. It confused her as much as it comforted her. She hesitated, pride still whispering, and she said she would figure it out. She said she did not want to be a burden. Ethan did not push. He simply told her that sometimes letting someone help is what keeps things from falling apart. Just then, a nurse stepped out and said Milo was awake and asking for his mom. As Naomi stood to go to her son, she softly refused Ethan's help. But inside the hospital room, Milo said something that would change her mind forever. Milo's voice was weak, but his words were strong enough to break something open inside his mother. In the quiet hospital room with monitors humming softly in the background, Milo looked at Naomi with tired eyes and said he did not want her to be so tired all the time. He said he heard her crying sometime when she thought he was asleep. He said he wished it would cost less money. The words were simple, spoken without blame, but they cut deep. Naomi felt her heart twist in a way she could not ignore. She had worked so hard to protect him from stress, yet he had been carrying it anyway. Standing near the doorway, Ethan heard enough to understand. He did not step closer. He did not interrupt. He simply witnessed the moment where pride began to lose its power. Naomi realized that trying to handle everything alone was not protecting her son. It was teaching him that love meant suffering in silence. The next morning, after Milo was discharged with a short-term insulin supply from the hospital, Ethan waited in the lobby with steady patience. Naomi approached him with hesitation still in her posture, but something had shifted in her. She thanked him for staying. She admitted she had been scared to accept help, because she did not want to depend on anyone. Ethan nodded and told her that depending on someone is not the same as being. Sometimes it is how families are built. Instead of offering money again, Ethan proposed something practical. His company, a regional logistics firm, had part-time remote scheduling positions that allowed flexible hours. The job required attention to detail, both things Naomi already managed daily in her life. It would not make her rich, but it would provide stable income and benefits, including insurance coverage. Naomi listened carefully. This was not charity. This was an opportunity. Ethan offered to connect her with his supervisor and help submit an application. He made it clear that she would earn the job on her own. He was simply opening a door. For the first time in a long while, Naomi felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. It was not fear, it was a possibility. Within a week, Naomi completed the interview process. Her years of managing schedules at the diner and balancing medical appointments impressed the hiring team. She was offered a flexible remote position. The relief she felt was quiet, but powerful. Insurance would restart in 30 days. Stability no longer felt impossible. Meanwhile, the Caldwell triplets had their own plans. Harper insisted that Milo come over after school so he would not sit alone in the apartment while Naomi adjusted to. Nolan began researching diabetic-friendly snacks, carefully organizing them in labeled containers. Beckett volunteered to walk Milo home in the evening, even though it added extra steps to his route. At first, Naomi resisted the idea of her son spending so much time at someone else's house. But when she saw Milo laughing again, something she had not heard freely in months, her resistance softened. The Caldwell home was noisy and it did not feel like charity. It felt like inclusion. Shared dinners became routine. Ethan cooked large meals that across 5 children. Harper helped Milo with homework explaining math problems. Nolan reminded everyone about balanced portions. Beckett listened to Milo talk about school with genuine interest. Slowly, a rhythm formed that did not feel forced. Naomi began staying for dinner occasionally, at first out of politeness, then out of comfort. She noticed how Ethan managed chaos with calm focus. She saw how he listened when children spoke, then in turn saw Naomi's strength more clearly. He noticed how carefully she monitored Milo's health, how she balanced gratitude with dignity. They were both parents, shaped by loss. They were no longer in it alone. The community began noticing. Neighbors saw Milo walking home with the teachers observed the children forming a close bond. The diner manager commented on how Naomi seemed lighter lately. The loneliness that once followed both began to fade quietly. It was replaced with shared responsibility and unexpected laughter. For the first time since Marissa's passing, Ethan's house did not feel too quiet at night, and for the first time since her divorce, Naomi did not feel like she was fighting the world alone. What began as overheard pain had grown into a chosen connection, not built by blood, but by care. Homework was done around a crowded table. The fear that once controlled Naomi's decisions loosened its grip. Ethan felt proud watching his children expand their kindness beyond their own walls. It felt like hope had entered the room without asking permission. Then one late afternoon, as Ethan checked his work email, a message appeared that made his stomach tighten. The subject line mentioned company restructuring and mandatory staff meetings. Just as their lives finally felt steady, Ethan realized that the security he had helped build might be about to shift again. And this time, the choice he faced could change everything. The email came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and with it came a choice that could undo everything. Ethan stared at the subject line from his executive team. Ethan stared at the subject line from his company's executive. The words were simple: operational restructuring and regional relocation. He opened the message slowly, already sensing the weight behind it. The company was consolidating offices, moving major operations to Denver. Senior remote employees were being offered promotions to. His name was on the promotion came with a salary increase. His name was on the short. It was the kind of opportunity most people worked years to earn. For a single father of 3, financial security mattered. College funds, medical coverage, future savings, it all flashed through his mind at once. On paper, it was the responsible choice, but paper did not show everything. Denver was over 1,000 miles away from Ohio. Accepting the position meant selling the house filled with memories of. It meant uprooting Harper, Nolan, and Beckett from their routine, and the friendships they had slowly rebuilt after loss. It meant leaving behind something newer too, something quieter but just as meaningful. That evening, he took the call with his supervisor in his home office. He asked practical questions about timeline and expectations. He tried to sound composed. What he did not realize was that Harper had paused in the hallway outside the door. Nolan and Beckett stood behind her, listening carefully. After the call ended, the triplets gathered in their room. They did not need full details. They understood enough. Moving meant leaving Milo. It meant breaking the rhythm that had formed around shared dinners and homework and quiet walks. Harper's eyes filled first. Nolan stared at the floor. Beckett whispered that Milo had just started feeling safe again. Downstairs, Ethan sat alone at the table long after everyone. He ran numbers in his ear. It would guarantee savings. It would protect his children's future in measurable ways. But there were other things he could not measure. The laughter at dinner. The way Milo's confidence had grown. The way Noemi's shoulders no longer seemed permanently tense. When Naomi heard about the potential move the next day, her reaction was quiet but immediate. She congratulated. She said it was an amazing opportunity. She said his children deserved that kind of security. But something behind her eyes shifted. Old memories rose up. The sound of a suitcase zipper closed. The feeling of someone choosing distance over. Naomi began to withdraw without meaning. She shortened her visit. She encouraged Milo to spend more time at home. She told herself it was better not to grow too attached. People left. That was the pattern she knew. Even kindness could be temporary. Ethan noticed the dizzy. The house felt slightly different, like a door had opened somewhere, letting in cold air. The triplets grew quieter around Milo, afraid to ask questions. Children who once refused to look away now feared looking. One evening, Ethan stood in the backyard watching the 5 kids laugh while playing a game of tag. Milo's energy had. Harper's voice rang out with confidence. Nolan pretended to trip dramatically. Beckett ran in wide circles. The scene looked ordinary, but to Ethan it felt rare. This was not forced. It was built slowly, day by day, through shared care. He realized something then. Love had grown quietly in his home. It had not arrived with a grand announcement. It had formed in small acts. An extra plate at dinner, a ride home from school, a job referral given without pride. It was chosen, not assigned. He remembered the promise he had made 3 years earlier in that hospital hallway. He had promised to stay. Not just physically, but emotionally. Staying did not always mean, but sometimes it did. His voice was steady. He thanked them for the offer. He explained that after careful thought, he would not be relocated. He would continue in his current remote role without promotion. The supervisor sounded surprised but respected his decision. When Ethan told his children, relief washed over their faces. Harper hugged him titles. Nolan let out a breath he had been. Beckett smiled in quiet understanding. They did not talk about money or titles. They talked about staying. Later that evening, Ethan told Naomi. He said it was not a sacrifice. It was clear. He explained that stability was not only financial, it was emotional. It was a presence. He chose the life they had because it felt right. Naomi listened silently, guilt beginning to rise. She saw what he had turned down. She understood the weight of it. Part of her felt grateful. Another part felt responsible. As relief settled over the Caldwell home, Naomi made a quiet decision of her own. Ethan had given up too much. She began preparing to step back before he. Naomi decided it was time to step back before she lost something she never meant to hold. She asked Ethan after dinner. One evening, while the kids were inside finishing homework, the air was cool and the quiet between them felt heavier than usual. Naomi told him she knew about the promotion he turned down. She said he should not have chosen differently because of her or Milo. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly together. She explained that she did not want to be the reason he ever felt stuck. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he spoke calmly. He told her the decision was not about sacrifice. It was about clarity. He said the promotion offered money, but staying offered meaning. He explained that the life they had built was not accidental. It had grown slowly, through shared responsibility and trust. He had not stayed out of guilt. He had stayed because it felt right. Naomi struggled to accept that. She had lived too long expecting people became complicated. She admitted she had started pulling back because she thought it would hurt less if she cursed. Ethan shook his head gently and told her that staying was not something he took lightly. He had made that promise long before she entered his life. This time, inside the house, the children did not give speeches or dramatic declarations. They showed their bond the only way they knew how. Harper was helping Milo with a science project, explaining each. Nolan was carefully organizing low-sugar snacks into containers labeled. Beckett was already planning a weekend bike ride that included Milo in every. Their actions spoke louder than any words could. His insulin was steady, his energy stronger. He laughed easily in the Caldwell home, no longer carrying the quiet guilt he once held. Naomi's new remote job provided stable hours and consistent insurance coverage. She no longer had to calculate every dose against shrinking bank balance. The fear that once sat at her kitchen table had slowly been replaced by structure and support. Holidays came and went with shared traditions forming naturally. Thanksgiving dinner included 5 children squeezing around one table, passing dishes and talking over. Christmas morning, meant two homes blending into one long, joyful mess of wrapping papers. The house that once felt too quiet for Ethan now felt alive in a new loneliness with shared chaos, and he welcomed it. For Naomi, shame slowly faded. She no longer felt like the struggling single mother hiding overdue bills. She felt included. She felt and respected. She moved mother hiding overdue. The community began to notice the quiet transformation. Neighbors talked about how the Caldwell kids and Milo seemed. Parents at school mentioned how kindness could ripple outward. Even the diner manager shared the story of the pharmacy moment with pride, and a small local fundraiser began to circulate online to support families facing medical costs. Noe was hesitant about the attention at first, but she realized the story was no longer about embarrassment, it was about connection. What started as overheard pain had become something larger than any of them expected. There were no dramatic confessions or rushed promises. There were shared glances across the dinner table, steady conversations after the kids went to sleep, and mutual respect built from understanding single parents. They both knew that love, if it formed, would grow from friendship and trust first. The focus remained on family. The founding family had become more fit and an idea. It was visible in everyday routines. It was in the way Harper saved Milo a seat at the table. It was in Nolan, reminding everyone of medication schedules without being asked. It wasn't Beckett knocking on Naomi's door just to check in. It was Ethan fixing a loose cabinet in Naomi's kitchen without making it feel like charity. One evening, months later, Naomi found herself standing in the same pharmacy where everything had started. This time, her insurance card was active. The pharmacist greeted her with a familiar smile. She paid for Milo's insulin without fear. As she walked out, she remembered the day she had left empty-handed, trying not to cry. She realized how different her life felt now. Back at the Caldwell house, dinner was already on the table. The noise was loud. The kitchen was crowded. 5 children moved around each other like they had always belonged in the same space. Ethan caught Naomi's eye and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. The moment circled back to that first overheard conversation in the pharmacy aisle. Looked. 3 children had refused to ignore a mother's quiet struggle. A father had chosen to step forward instead of staying distant. A mother had chosen to accept support instead of standing alone. 5 people who once felt invisible now sit around one dinner table, not connected by blood, but by the moment 3 children ignore a mother in pain. If this story touched something in your heart, don't just scroll away from it. Stories like this grow when people and kindness choose to pass them forward, so share it with someone who needs a reminder that they're not alone. And if you believe the chosen family can be just as powerful as blood, stay connected here for more stories that prove that see. But here's something to think about. If you had overheard that pharmacy call, would you have walked away? Or would you have stepped in? Let me know in the comments.